Hey guys, Ganesh from Covalent here, and we're excited to have a superstar as a guest here. It's Sid Kala from Roll, and Roll is building a pretty exciting platform in the social token space. So Sid has, briefed me on what's going on in the space. They have like 300 tokens, very distinct and very unique from the traditional DeFi trading focused user base that we see. So yeah, really cool. So just a reminder that this is part of the 1 million wallets campaign that Covalent is sponsoring. There are git count bounties for over $5,000, and definitely go in. We are giving sample codes. If you look on Twitter, there are actually dozens of these wallets that these guys have forked from the bounty and then created Chrome extensions. I think the next one is a balances thing. So we have full video tutorials, we have code samples. You just have to fork and go away. So definitely partake. I'm sure you'll learn something. But for now, what Sid is going to share is essentially his vision of how Roll is playing out in this future. And I'm really excited to hear from Sid. Sid, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ganesh. I think I want to start off first with just giving the lay of the land in terms of what social money is and what Roll is building, and then kind of tie it into the entire infrastructure stack pretty much on the Web3 side, and obviously a very crucial role that wallets play as well, and also something that Ganesh briefly touched upon, which is it's a different paradigm, it's a different way of thinking about than, let's say, your traditional DeFi space or some of the more trading-focused interfaces that we have seen. So we'd love to dive in and explore some of the things that we have seen and we see working towards in the next iteration. So yes, a high level about like social money. When we started Roll, the idea, or I guess the more broader trend in the world that we were really seeing was this shift from user-generated content, which pretty much defined the social space on the web for the last 10 to 15 years, into what we kind of identify as the user-generated capital phase, where the idea is that creators and communities can own and control their own economy through their own monetary system. And they kind of do that via what we call social money. And what we really believe is that the next generation of social platforms will natively integrate social money into the platforms themselves. And you can almost think of that as, in some ways, every traditional Web2 social platform also has some currency. So like likes, for example, are the currency of Facebook or Instagram. And what we try to do is kind of make that explicit, but also more importantly, give that power back to the creators and their communities. So your early supporters, your early people. So it's not just about, hey, here's $20 on Patreon for a t-shirt. It's more about, hey, here's $20. I want to be part of this community and support this community, but also grow with the community. That's very exciting for people. It's a new way of thinking about creators and communities and monetization and so on. So that's kind of what we are really excited about. It doesn't fit very well into like a Web2, Web3 kind of space, but just like a broader idea around creator monetization and economies kind of fits into social money. You can also think of this as a very emerging social finance kind of a category that very broadly includes NFTs, your crypto art, the ability to again control the creative output that you are responsible for as a creator. In a more distant, we'll probably talk about that a little bit, but there are some convergences with DeFi and some financial primitives, because ultimately DeFi it's a financial primitive, right? You're building it on top of something. So right now that something is mostly Ether and stablecoins. But that's something we believe can actually be social capital in the future. It's something like social money. So we'd really like to dive there during the course of this conversation and see what, when we're talking about it from a perspective of wallets, at a high level, what that looks like. Yeah, so I guess jumping into the wallet side of things, when you think about wallets generally, I think that the current mental model that you have is that of a kind of a financial primitive, right? You're thinking about a Bloomberg / brokerage like a Robinhood or Schwab or something that's kind of showing you the prices and where things are, your lending dashboards and so on. um, which is really great for what it does. But we think that when you're talking about the next hundreds of millions to like a billion users of crypto, which I think is not actually that far off as many people think, you really want to try to think of it not just as financial primitives, but more as social primitives. So when you're talking about the social primitives on the Web3 side, the questions become, well, what does that mean? So there's an equivalent of like on Facebook. Like, what is that in the Web3 social equivalent? And again, like that's not defined in stone, but that's something you want to think about. That's something that where your wallet really kind of needs to showcase in some ways. So also, like when you're thinking about like more traditional social media, you want to think about this lens of the philosophical aspects of blockchain, really, right? What does that mean for a creator to own the value that you are trying to create with your community? What does it mean for the community to exist in a way that's not tied to a platform? Like, we don't really see that. That doesn't really exist in the traditional world. There's no way for you to take all your Twitter followers and move somewhere else because you don't agree with the moderation decisions of what Twitter as a company makes. So those things don't exist, whereas those do exist in a more of a Web3 world. So the focus should be on where that differentiation really happens. And you're also like looking at it through a new lens. So your traditional social has concepts like feeds. You have social graphs, and social graph is something that you've friended. But the issue with social graph, which you'll know, especially when you're talking to more creators, is that it's not differentiated, it's not segmented. So if you have 100,000 followers on Instagram, they're all the same. It's exactly the same person. Like, I follow someone, you follow someone else follows someone. There's no differentiation among the fans. Whereas in a more Web3 world, it's because it's more of a focus on the community. There's a very clear differentiation, for example, with someone who holds more of your social money has probably been engaged way more in your community than someone who's just joined who also does not have any social money. So these types of primitives get redefined in this new kind of a social world. The other, I guess, like important thing, also like as a mental model, is that traditional social is very, very dependent on ads and engagement. That does create things that are becoming much more conscious right now, and people in the community have known this for a while. It's like your incentives are very misaligned. What Facebook wants to do is like get that next dopamine hit that like, try to get that engagement out, because that's what affects your bottom line. That's the advertising revenue. In more of a social money, like kind of a primitive world, like there is no advertising revenue per se, or even if it might exist on some platforms, it's pretty negligible or non-existent. What you're instead looking for is the value accrual. You as a community are able to accrue value, and why do you accrue value? That's because people want to be part of that community. Well, why do people want to be part of that community? It's because, well, maybe you have thoughtful discourse. It's not about ads and engagement. Like, people don't want to be a part of a community because it has the most likes on Facebook. They want to be part of the community because they're getting some value out of it. So in terms of tying the value very directly to the value you're also deriving from the community, you kind of remove a lot of the perverse incentives that have kind of plagued the traditional social media, really, because you're no longer optimizing for ads. So that's a high level on the social side, because just a regular framework for thinking about not just social money, but also a lot of like crypto art, NFTs, a bunch of other stuff is really, they kind of bridge the worlds, right? Like in some ways, like you bridge Web 2 and Web 3. It's not about like, it's not a lending protocol or like an exchange protocol would become a little more core Web 3 infrastructure. But now we're trying to bridge those gaps. So you kind of want to have like some pieces of Web 2 and some pieces of Web 3. So when we briefly touched upon social, that's, just a good way to think about that is your traditional Web 2 social. But when you talk about like Web 3, the other things, especially from a, let's say like a wallet design perspective, something to think about is really about the long tail of assets. This is not something you see in more traditional wallets or like DeFi infrastructure, because guess what? There are like 5 dexes, for example, through which you're going to route volumes. You're going to have your Uniswap, Balancer, SushiSwap, a couple of other smaller exchanges. So once you've added a few of them, that's pretty much all you need to do. Whereas once you're talking about social, once you're talking about creators, you're talking about tens of thousands, if not more, of the types of tokens that you're tracking. So which is why something like Covalent as an infrastructure provider makes a lot of sense, and why I'm very excited to talk to the people and see what they're going to be building, because that's extremely important in the world that we are in. You cannot just take, hey, here is a top 100 social money from creators that are interesting, and that's all we track, because the long tail is very heavy. There are communities of 50 people, 100 people, like all over the place, and you can't really like exclude them from what you're building. So that's very interesting. When you're talking about social graph, that's super interesting in a Web3 primitive, because the data is completely open now, right? And it's portable. So what that really means is, think about being able to see your Facebook social graph and instantly building a UX layer on top of that. That's how powerful that is. So when you're thinking about social graphs, the things that are interesting are, I follow someone. It means I hold someone's social money, or sometimes even on the NFT and gaming side. Who else do I hold? But more interestingly, when you do like data analysis, again, like something that Covalent's really good at, and we're excited to work with you guys and see what that happens, is, let's say I hold like 5 social money. Like, what kind of algorithms can you write based on the entire blockchain history and data of, let's say, like 10,000 other social tokens, and tell me which ones I may be most interested in? Because maybe you see that the types of people who hold these 5 or 10 tokens that I own are usually also interested in some other things. So the idea of discovery and discoverability becomes like a big data problem. And that lives on the blockchain. That data is literally the blockchain data. And those become very interesting. So what wallets can very easily do is you can surface those interesting connections that are not obvious. And again, I don't think they have a very good equivalence in the Web2 world, because if you're trying to steal that from Facebook, they'll just shut you down and shut down your API. That's the business that they're in. But from a wallet perspective, this becomes a very interesting design space now, because you have all this data from the community perspective, and then kind of connect to what happens. That's one aspect of discovery, which is I'm a part of X communities. What else should I do? The other interesting thing that you can we're seeing some primitives emerge within the Web3 world. So one primitive that's kind of coming up, and we are seeing a lot of traction on Roll and with the social money that we have issued, is the idea of gated community access. So this is also a way of differentiating some of your followers and community members. What that at a very high level means is, coming back to our example of 100,000 followers on Instagram, there's no way to segment those followers. You don't know who your most active community members are. But with social money, there is a way to know who are the most serious members who are just passing by. Nothing wrong with passing by, but just a way for you to segment that. And one thing that we have seen happen is that, hey, you can enter let's say there's a public Discord channel and everyone's hanging out and having fun. But there's a private channel only for people who hold more than 2,000 or 200 of a specific social money. What that means is, like, these are the most serious members. This is where the more serious conversation happens, and we're like really excited to be a part of that. And people want to belong to those groups. Like, we've seen that time and again. And so what does that mean, and how do you discover things of that nature? That becomes very interesting, because let's say a creator tells you this either via an API or through like some other means, that, hey, my Discord has, let's say, 5 channels theoretically, and I have different tiers, right? If you have 50 social money, you can enter this layer, all the way to, let's say, like 1,000, right? If you have 1,000 social money, I can enter this like super premier league or something. But who is the one who knows how much social money you have? It's the wallet layer. The wallet knows that, hey, you have 720, which means you can enter this specific category. But if you're able to earn, let's say, like 50 more, then you'll enter this next category. So there's a discovery in the sense of, like, not just asking which other communities I can be a part of, but so that's like your horizontal growth. Like, I'm part of 5 communities, I'm going to discover 10 more. But also like vertical, which is I am a part of this community. I'm engaged fairly, like, a decent amount so far. But if I provide more value, if I do some other cool things in this community and I can earn some more social money, then I can kind of become a more valued member of this community. So wallets are also like a good place to try to get that and wrap that idea around that. So that's the high level at the Web3 side. Bringing them together really, like one of the things I think it'll really help people think about is that you generally want to try to bring those two worlds together. At the very least, you want to be able to, let's say, give ownership of each that can be customized based on the creator. So, for example, a creator should be able to go into like a wallet page, kind of have, and then be able to add very basic information, even if it's something like, hey, this is my Twitter handle or this is my Discord channel. You can get that information, right? Just like verify signatures and things like that. But what that really like helps you do is like stand out from the rest of the wallet experience generally, and also like kind of really aids in discovery. So if you're looking for some new community, like one immediate thing you want to do is like, oh, there's a name, there's a ticker name that's on the blockchain, and that's great. But the blockchain doesn't contain all of that data. The blockchain doesn't tell you how interesting my community is. My Discord channel will tell you that. So like some kind of a way to integrate and bring some of those worlds together is going to be super interesting. Yeah, that's kind of like a high level 15-minute overview of social money, like where things are. We also work very closely with a lot of NFT artists and some games and things of that nature as well. So we have a lot of overlap with those worlds. I know a lot of wallets are already thinking about things like displaying your NFTs and what can you do with NFTs. Some of those questions are common again. For example, if you're in a game, say you have like Axie or something, and then your wallet can then answer the question, hey, what can I do with these Axies? And they can tell you like, hey, actually you can battle them if you have 3 of them. But if you have only 2, then the wallet can prompt you like, hey, you don't have enough to battle. You may want to buy 1 more Axie. So kind of high level, like the primitives are somewhat similar. But yeah, that's kind of like a high level overview really of what we are, where we see the lay of the land. And yeah, happy to dive deeper into anything that makes sense.
Awesome, Sid. Thank you for that overview. Makes a lot of sense, and I'm pretty excited to see how this is all going to play out over the next couple of years. So let's think about it from let's do a customer discovery on this call, right? Let's figure out, what do customers want? How do we get the biggest traction? And how do we get that hockey stick growth? So you said right now there are about 300 or so tokens. The biggest one is the whale token, I believe, with a lot of holders. And then there's the whole long tail. These tokens are not financial tokens. They're just like a token of appreciation. That's basically what it is.
And it's market. So like whale is a good example of something that has a market.
Okay.
Things emerge pretty naturally. So actually, maybe that's worth diving into, like maybe for 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social starts as a very community-based thing, right? Like you earn social money based on actions that you've done that are valuable to the creator and to the community. But over time, again, like one of the very interesting things with the blockchain and with the whole DeFi world is like they are permissionless. So someone can go and add liquidity to Uniswap, and then all of a sudden you have kind of a very basic market for these. And those do become very interesting because, when you think about like one of the, like a very interesting customer things that we always discovered when we went in early was, now there are many ways to support creators right now. So something like Patreon is a good example, and they're very, very successful, and we really like the company with what they do. But there's no like upside that you share. So there's no, other than bragging rights, like all you will say is like, hey, I found this band when they were playing in this Brooklyn garage, and I went and listened to them. Now they are like the biggest thing in the world on Musical.ly or TikTok or whatever. And that's pretty much like all you get. There's no like a direct ownership stake. So one thing with social money that is very interesting is that you are able to get like not just those bragging rights, so to say, but also that ownership in the entire pie that you helped create because you were one of the first early community members to do. So social money very seamlessly plugs into all of these primitives. So like the DeFi Uniswap primitive being one. We haven't really seen like lending and swaps. I think we're a little small for that, but I think we'll see that within like 6 months to a year. The other thing that we do is we plug in very natively, very easily with OpenSea. So OpenSea is like by far the largest NFT marketplace. You can buy and sell NFTs, digital art. So a lot of artists do this where they will post some of their more premium art, some of the art that they really want their community to own for sale, not for ETH, you're foregoing US dollars, but it's in your social money, and you can list that natively. And we have, I think like more than 50 or 60 OpenSea stores right now, artist stores that accept social money.
Fascinating. So going back to what a creator would want, a creator would want a full experience, would expect a full experience. So not just minting the tokens, but also plugins for Discord, maybe a mobile app to communicate with their communication tools, basically with their token holders and all of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. What we have built at Roll, so we have like an iOS app, we have an Android app.
Okay.
We have a web app, obviously, that you can also kind of go to, like desktop and mobile. Some of the tooling that we are working on right now is those like third-party tooling around, like how do you easily send social money, receive social money from a lot of the social platforms.
Very cool. And so it should also be possible to theme these iOS or Android apps. So if I'm a music band, I should be able to theme it and have the iconography and pictography for my band. And that way it's a holistic experience, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of the social side of things, some of those things become very important, like the software side of things. So it's not just about, hey, this is my website or something. And that's like a good first start so people can do. I can almost think of it like, like what's my page going to look like on this wallet side? What are people going to see? That experience does become very, very important. So the kind of like language that we use, and all of that, so not so much financial per se. It's more about the community and the sense of belonging.
I see. So in the mainstream, it's still in the startup phase, but I would say outside of crypto, A16Z and some of these guys, they talk heavily about creators and creator communities and all of that stuff. So a classic example of that is people leaving traditional publishing houses to start their own Substack, right? So everyone has a Substack, and that's a way for people to have control over their future. And as long as they're putting out solid pieces and build a following, they can build, the brand becomes themselves. So it's an amazing transformation, I think, which is healthy. It's more resilient for the economy. So where do you see? So let's say that's like a really good milestone for social money on the blockchain to hit. So how do you see the path from where we are today to reaching something like Substack, and then beyond Substack, reaching hundreds of millions of communities? So what is in store? What is the roadmap looking like for that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, because that trend has been going on for a while, especially with the COVID lockdowns and everything. We're seeing like a very accelerated trend towards that. We really like that, people being successful on these platforms. That's really, really good. In terms of where social money fits, I think conceptually the difference is that of an ownership around a community. So when you're writing a Substack and people subscribe to the Substack, in a way, they're paying you. So let's say you're an investigative journalist, right? And you start a Substack, and that's very important work. And you don't think that the current newsrooms do justice to the type of investigative journalism that you are doing, because of all the things we talked about, like your ad-based revenue models, let's say, being incompatible with what you're doing. So what you can do is you can find those 100 or 1,000 people that really support and like your work. You can make a living off of that, and then provide the work that you feel more fulfilled about. That's like a very Substacky type of a story. More of the social money story is more around like community. So the idea is that, hey, if I form, let's say I'm an investigative journalist, I want to form a group of like-minded individuals, people who are probably themselves investigative journalists, or perhaps people who really appreciate the art of what goes on to be successful. And now you're forming a group, you're forming a club of people, and everyone has a stake in the success of this group. So it's not just like an individual, I pay you X dollars to write a piece. It's more about like, I'm forming this community. I'm not sure, it can become successful because it's going to kind of create and come up with a new model for how we should think about content in the 2020s, for example. But you have a direct ownership stake in this. So like fundamentally and philosophically, like that's where I think the differentiation comes. But the good thing in the short term is that social money and any like Web3 primitive for that matter can play very nicely with these primitives. So for example, a very simple example here would be anyone who supports me on Substack, for example, let's say like becomes a subscriber, will get a little bit of social money. That's part of my community. That's part of their ownership that I am building. But it also shows my appreciation towards like the early people who are using that. Or you can also use it almost as a reward-based currency, right? Like you can say, people, we've seen some very interesting things like people hiding Easter eggs in their content. So it's like, I want to see, like, are you actually reading the post or are you just like, scrolling through or something? And maybe you have a little link somewhere that links to what we call like an earn code. You can click on that earn code and like almost like a bit.ly style link, and then you can claim some social money. But that's hidden. They're not like telling you outright. But if you find it, it's great. Like that's like a little fun little thing that you can do with the people. So you can do all of these things, and then you can, we've seen people do that with YouTube or some other platforms. So the good thing with Web3 is like it's a very agnostic tool. It's very neutral in some ways. Like you can never do this with like I don't know, Facebook and Snapchat, for example. They're never going to play nice with each other, right? But something like a Web3 or even the infrastructure layer for that's totally fine. Like Snap users and Facebook users can very easily use these tools.
Fascinating. So any big YouTubers on the platform today or in the near future?
So one of the first users of Roll, actually, one of the first creators. So she's a YouTuber. She's a bit more higher on Instagram. So she was in this niche of ASMR and beauty intersection. So ASMR, for those who don't know, is kind of this very emergent internet phenomenon where certain sounds kind of give you this tingling sensation in the spine, kind of a very niche but very large category as we've learned over the years. And so she uses Tingles, which is her social money, to reward, for example, people on Patreon. She has given that for people who patrol the internet for like piracy of her videos. That's like an emerging problem with many ASMR artists. And she rewards them, like when she finds people like blatantly ripping off her work and her art, and then she's able, like the fans are able to report that. Now she's able to get that taken down, and she can reward them with Tingles. Now, so like very interesting use cases already emerging. We have many, very interestingly, some people in the very hardcore Bitcoin camp for their first touch point with Ethereum being social money. So we're very excited about some of the communities there. And we see a lot of these little clubs and little cliques kind of forming. And there's a YouTubers on Roll. There's a whole Substack writers on Roll. There's a few journalists on Roll that are becoming a category. There are entrepreneurs on Roll. That's a fairly big category as well. Very, very excited to see these categories emerge.
Is there a process? If I want to create the Ganesh social money and I want to give all my fans and followers, I'm sure there's like two, maybe my wife and my mom, but let's say there's like hundreds of thousands of fans who want to partake in my success. What is the process like?
Yeah, so right now, maybe you want to, we've seen social money kind of named towards the community be more successful. So my first suggestion would be, instead of calling it Ganesh, let's call it like bonds, because I do know your background in chemistry and biotech. So let's say you were to create and issue bonds with us. Our very process is simply right now, like we just fill out like a type form. We do want to make sure that you're going to be successful. So we're still in somewhat of a limited beta. So we just like kind of want to know and vet you a little bit, like make sure your community is real, make sure your use cases are real, where it's not being geared as a security and all of that stuff. And once you've done like basic due diligence, like we'll issue bonds with us with Roll. The next step for you will really be let's come up with like what kinds of actions are useful to you. So for example, at a company level, like you may be interested to say, I'm going to give a bounty of 10,000 bonds, for example, for someone who comes up with a very cool project that someone is building. And that's a great way to kind of do that, right? Maybe you can have we've seen some people do like a very simple, even like a bug bounty type of thing, where, you find bugs in my website, I'm going to give you some like X or Y. You can give some rewards for commits on GitHub, for example. And all of this on like the tech side. More on the community side. So for example, you have a Discord. You see some people almost becoming like natural community leaders within that Discord. They're answering questions or helping people out with some things. Maybe you want to make them mods and give them like 1,000 bonds per month. So things of this nature that you can immediately do. And in return, like you can also have something like, hey, anyone who holds 1,000 bonds, you can kind of ask me directly questions about this thing. Or you can do it as a more of a one-off thing. So you can say, hey, if you're an emerging developer or an entrepreneur, you want to learn about your company, like obviously you have like good advice for those people. You can say, hey, 100 bonds, and I'm going to hop on a 15-minute call with you and go through your company. So things like that.
Fascinating. So I would say these tokens have to be earned because there's not a lot of liquidity, you can't buy them. So this is the only way to have ownership of these tokens is to earn them.
Especially, you definitely want that to be the case, right? Like
yeah. Okay.
The starting point is not markets. Like markets naturally emerge over time. The starting point is, why is bonds valuable? And bonds are valuable because of the community that you have built based on your background, but also importantly, like based on the people that surround you and then the bonds community, right? We have seen this with RNG, for example. That's a really good example. So this is from Richard, who runs Galaxy Practice. So he's a venture capital fund. The fund itself is pretty large. I think they recently raised like a $300 million round. But that's not, the currency is not like, what do you do at a VC level? The reason for using RNG is Richard has like really incorporated this whole gaming community and some parts of venture and some parts of people in the ecosystem, especially on the more emergent gaming and startup ecosystem, into this one single Discord. It's like a very high density information action-packed thing that many people find super valuable to have. So that's why RNG is valuable, not because it's by some VC, it's more because like of everything else that surrounds it. So that's the same reason why bonds will be valuable.
Interesting. Okay, and then I'm mindful of time here, so we have some questions from the audience. The first question is, can you speak about how governance works with community tokens? So I would say to govern a DAO, you have these governance tokens and you can vote on proposals and so on. What's the overlap with social tokens? Do the holders of, so let's say I have the bond token, or let's say I'm using it for my personal thing. I want to keep my community, I want the community to keep me accountable to do certain things, right? Where's the overlap here? Like, how are they different?
Yeah, there's a super interesting experiments that we have seen. We think of governance as almost a module that you can install on top of social money. So you have the freedom to do what you want. At one end, we have actually seen literally people using like snapshot.pages, like similar to what any DeFi protocol uses, and divide things up. So like a good and then do community management through like a multi-sig, which is like the simplest DAO that you can kind of build, like an MVP of a DAO. So what we have seen people do is like a simplest example of this would be like community grants, for example. So once you've built bonds up, now maybe you think that, hey, it's actually time for a website where bonds should aggregate. And let's take a simple example. Let's say you want to say, like, I want to have a design, like a logo design. Like, what should bonds look like? And bonds is like such an open thing. Like, I'm sure people will be super creative. But do you want to be in the business of saying this is the best logo, or do you want to leave it to the community? Maybe you want to leave it to the community. Like, there's lots of good designers there as well. So what you will say is like, hey, I have a bounty of 1,000 bonds. The community will vote on it, and they'll decide who the winner is. And whoever the community decides is going to get the 1,000 bonds. It's not Ganesh deciding what the best logo is. It's the community deciding.
I see. Okay, makes sense. The second question is, what are the thoughts on the application of bonding curves with regard to social tokens?
Yeah, there are some very interesting things that you can do on the bonding curve. It has to be a good use case, though. You don't want to just use a bonding curve for the sake of using a bonding curve. Because technically Uniswap is a bonding curve too. It's just a two-sided bonding curve. So many social money are already traded on Uniswap. So that's already, I guess, like bonding curve. So that's the answer. But like more nuanced answer we've seen some really good artists using the bonding curve very intelligently with social money and also their art. So one of the things with NFT art is you can make several editions of an art. And then those you can price them on a bonding curve, right? So when people are buying in, there are two incentives now. Like one, you can buy in to speculate on the value of the art, or two, you can buy it early because you really believe in the artist and want to hold that piece. So that's also another thing that you can kind of combine with social money, because now you can say the first edition is for, let's say, like 1,000 of my social money. The second one costs 1,500. The third one costs 3,000, and so on, or whatever. But if you're talking about two-sided market with two-sided bonding curves, then something like Uniswap is a really good example.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's about it. We're just like a purview on what's happening with social tokens, and I'm really excited. I want to see what's happening with the space. And a little story here is that even though we're working day in and day out in the DeFi space, this whole social money phenomenon kind of missed. I missed it until someone in the community used Covalent's APIs to write a blog post. Makoto, who was on our previous podcast as well, and then he ended up winning that hackathon, I believe. Yeah. And he created this whole social tokens radar map of ownership and all that stuff. So fascinating. So I've been like playing with this. I've spoken to a couple of people who hold the social tokens as well to see what's going on. And then, it's pretty crazy what's going out there. Anyways, so Sid, thank you so much for your generosity in coming and sharing with our community. What we'll do here is we will publish the video on YouTube and brand it as part of 1 million campaigns. We have some things in store where there's a social money element, but we'll roll that out over the next couple of days. So I'm excited to see what the community comes up with.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ganesh. Really, I'm talking about social money.
Cheers. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you.
Bye, guys.